Good evening, everyone, and we resume the 1 in 70-second interactive war game series. First of all, a thank you to everyone who's taken part in the polls. They really help determine the direction the war game is going to go in and the next steps. And tonight's episode is titled, Where Do We Go From Here? And I'm looking at the military and civil society in a 1 in 70-second what if context. So what has happened? Well, Atsmo and Drafana province, which is pretty much this one here in the Malagasy state, the what if state, obviously that's a real province in real life, has gone into partial revolt and has been infiltrated by Marmatian super deadly commandos. So the Malagasy president here and his generals are looking at how to deal with this situation. Now, the military are not very happy with the president. Madagascar in 1 in 70-second is a democracy. The president's been coming up with phrases such as president for life and the fact that he is the sole person to save the people. And the military are not very happy with that. And really what the role of the military and law forces should be in this 1 in 70-second state is they should be looking after the state. They should be looking after the constitution, if there is one. Obviously in Britain we don't have one, but they should be maintaining the peaceful transition of power, democratic rights for the people, and human rights. They should be creating a fair and equal civil society or assisting in it. This is really a crucial point for the 1 in 70-second state because it could spiral from going from a democracy into going to an autocracy, or it could go into a dictatorship. Now, this has happened so many times, both within African states and within other states. You could argue that Putin's Russia is an autocracy. Kim's North Korea is a democratic state, as they say. In reality, if you look at it, you would say it is a dictatorship. It doesn't have fair and equal representation for the people. Now, some people could argue and say, well, a democracy isn't really democratic, and various conspiracy theories could come up. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to stick to 1 in 70-second scale wargaming. But you have two choices really when you talk about law and order. And the law and respect for the law is vital to democracy. The two cannot function without each other. If you don't have rights of representation enshrined by law, then you have a trend towards autocracy, or you have a trend on the other side to anarchy. So the Malagasy 1 in 70-second state needs to balance those and needs to stay as a democracy, and the military are firmly committed to that. They've had a word with President Damba and they made it clear that he is not the president for life, and he needs to let them and the state manage this situation so the Malagasy democracy can continue. They will enforce law and order, but they will do it from the principles, the Pelian principles of consent, and they are not going to go down the route of repression. You either have consent or you have repression. Repression is very dangerous. So what can the situation lead to, and how can this problem be resolved? Well, first, you have to understand what has happened that's led to this situation, which is quite sudden and unexpected. And firstly, there's been some legitimate grievances from the people of the province here, and that is to do with a lack of wealth distribution. You've got this oil-rich country in 1 in 70-second scale with pipelines coming across here, and oil wealth is not well distributed. There's a lack of food and employment in this area. And this reflects the real Malagasy state here. If you have a look at these images I've got from Google Maps, you'll see that actually it is a very sparse, very Spartan area. It is very sparsely populated, rugged rural terrain, and there are some problems in the real Malagasy state going back to 2009. And if you think about the infrastructure, the roads, the living conditions, anything like that, and this is going to be modelled in the war game, that can lead to grievances where it's not upheld. If there is a non-engagement of the local population, both by the president, who thinks he's the president for life, or ethnic grievances, ethnic differences, tribal grievances, differences in communities, difference in religion, then that can then lead to exclusion, which then makes the area rife for infiltration, changes in ideology, and that's what the Malmations have done. The Malmations are effectively employing a form of asymmetric warfare against the Malagasy state. They can't compete and they can't beat the Malagasy state in conventional armed combat, but what they can do is they can upset the apple cart, so to speak. Now, if the response of the president is heavy-handed, and thankfully 86% of the poll have said no, go back to democracy, which is really good, then the president can then go into presidential overreach. You have repression, and because war is a continuation of politics by other means, you can then get to civil war. Now, there could be a state war between the Malagasy state and the Malmation state, MVM. However, that's best avoided. And what we'll look at is the hunt for the submarine, the Red November submarine. That's separate. I'm going to have to run a separate video on that. And also we'll look at how they're going to avoid civil war. Now, it's important that because war is a continuation of politics by other means, that there is a political process. So the generals have made this really clear to the president that the use of force needs to be a minimum. They need to have respect for what we have, which is the European Convention of Human Rights, Human Rights Act 1998. They've got something similar, but you've got Article 2, preservation of life, Article 3, prohibition of torture, Article 8, rights to private life, Article 10, rights to protest. So they don't quite have that in the 1 in 72nd world, but they've got something similar. They don't have the police, they have law officers. But essentially the function is the same, policing or law by consent. Now let's have a look at the ground, and Ian asked a really good question. What's the disposition on the ground? So whilst all of this has been happening, and whilst they're still looking for the submarine, they're now into day 2 and 3 of looking for the submarine, and day 2 and 3 of the ground action, the intel services have started gathering a picture of what's happening. I've done it very simply. So green means that it's good, law and order is preserved, civil society is preserved. Orange means civil society is breaking down, and red means it's broken down, and these are the areas where the Malmations have established their base camps. Now, there aren't many Malmations. They're a light force. They've landed over time via submarines, via small boats, creeping in and generally getting people to take the Marmite. Along the coast here, there's some areas around the oil pumping station where civil society and law and order is maintained. So, what can happen if the Malagasy military and law forces go down the route of repression? Well, it can lead to revolt, and it can lead to an escalation of the civil war and ultimately a revolution. It can also lead to civilian deaths and the military being implicated in war crimes. So, what are the generals suggesting? Well, firstly, they're suggesting that there needs to be a political engagement. Legitimacy of the democratically elected government needs to be restored. So unfortunately, President Damba, you will have to comply with the democratic process again. There needs to be a resolution of the grievances, and that needs to be done by consent, obtaining the consent again, and that's to do with the will. But the military and the law forces still have a job to do. And what they need to do is get from the engagement in armed conflict back to a situation where law and order is in place. So that means they're essentially going from the point of using artillery, weapons, soldiers, specialist police units like these special law officers, I should say, through to civil disturbances, riot and disorder, to giving aid to the population, to having to use military means or specialist law officers and special law equipment like these butlers Saracens with Australian turrets. G'day mate, g'day John. And then going to the position where actually the law is back to how it used to be, just in their law vehicles, civil society, ambulance, health services can operate, and the law is then back to their lightly armed, small arms only, or just unarmed, doing their job with the people. So that's where they need to get to. Now the Marmation forces, and coming back to Ian's point, and this is going to the poll which has just been completed. Thank you everyone for taking part. The Marmation forces that have infiltrated are light to medium armed and size. They've got no heavy artillery. They've got some light anti-aircraft and some man-pads. They've got some medium MGs. They haven't taken any arms depots yet. And they're a disparate group mixed in with the population, where they forced the population to take the Marmite and have their decision days. Now, the Malagasy forces are mobile. They have an escalation dominance. They'll be using a minimum use of force to accomplish their objectives. They'll be handing over to the civil powers once their mission is complete, and they will have an exit strategy. They're going to be using their advantages in airborne helicopter operations and mobility to go into these areas and to restore civil society. Now, what has happened over the first couple of days of the war game is a very quick movement of mobile forces has allowed a ring to be put around the province here. Now, this isn't the whole of the province. The province does extend up there to Toledo, and it does extend down here. Tularia, not Toledo, that's in America. It does extend down here to the base of the Malagasy state. So they've been able to contain that, and that's been done with the Centauro units and with the Boxer units, and they are holding that ring. The Navy will now step up patrols with the law boats to stop any arms and further infiltration of weapons and supplies into the Marmation forces, cutting them off. The light mobile forces, the airborne forces, will then go in with intel-led operations to take on the Marmation super deadly commandos and to restore civil society. So they're going to be doing intel-led operations, doing a lot of engagement and protection for the locals to stop the Marmatians coming back and forcing the decision days on them. They're going to reverse the Marmation power and influence, restore civil society and engagement in democracy, and then they will exit and law and order should be restored. It's going to be a long process with lots of videos. So how this is going to work for the channel, well, I'm going to construct various war games, maybe taking out a base camp, Marmation base camp. Maybe the Marmatians have captured some civilians, hostage rescue operations. Maybe there's some weapons smuggling operations coming in, all using all of the resources that I've built up and still building to try and do it as an interactive war game where people on the channel have their opinions registered, and then that structures the next part of the war game. Meanwhile, the Navy is looking for the Red November bottle class submarine, and that's coming up. And then eventually the Malagasy forces will have to use their positive effect to reverse some of the Marmation influence in 1 in 72nd what if world. So stay tuned. Let me know what you think. Lots of building going on behind the scenes, lots of painting going on. The loft is still full of models that I've collected over 25 years. I'm working through them. Take care. Goodbye.